I think we're in good shape whenever you're ready.
Great. Hi, everybody. I'm Ruth Pack-Adler. I'm one of the attorneys here at Abnauer Weicker, and I work in our Columbus office. I practice primarily in the area of special education, K-12, but also post-high school. I also handle our juvenile criminal practice that arises out of educational issues. So things like truancy or assault or other disciplinary matters that may have our students ending up in the court system. I primarily practice kind of midway through Ohio and down to the south. So Renee is my counterpart in the northern part of the state. Um, Describe myself. I am a white woman wearing glasses, gray shoulder length hair, and I'm wearing a peach and white striped blouse. Um, Fun fact about me, I was thinking about this yesterday. Um, when I was a child, I was fortunate enough to get a ride on the Goodyear blimp. My uncle was the accountant for Goodyear, and so I got to ride in the Goodyear blimp. Today, I'm going to speak about accommodations, self-advocacy, and expectations. It's always a challenge for us, given what we saw in Heather's last slide. Our attendees today come with different, perspectives, attorneys, advocates, parents. So I want to keep the content fresh and meaningful, but also informative for what it is, your role, that brings you here, but also give you some guidance for going forward. We're going to speak about how the students' rights change when it comes to disability between K-12 and post-secondary settings. We've talked a lot the past day about the various laws that are impactful in this space. And what it's critical to remember is that biggest mistake families are making in the move from K-12 to post-secondary is assuming that college or the next school is 13th grade, that things are just going to continue, especially for parents who have had good experiences with their local districts. But everything changes. Everything changes. IDEA, which we talked about yesterday and somewhat today, is that affirmative obligation. Schools have to identify the students, schools have to evaluate the students, they have to develop the IEPs and provide FAPE. The schools drive the process. But once we step out, once we get that high school diploma, college starts with a different question because they're bound by ADA and Section 504. And it's not what does the student need, it's what reasonable accommodations will allow this student, this qualified student who we have accepted, to have equal access. And that's a very different legal inquiry. So the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights actually has a very excellent comprehensive packet. I may have that added to my documents afterward. I should have sent a link along with it. It is the OCR Students with Disabilities Preparing for Post-Secondary Education pamphlet, Know Your Rights and Responsibilities. They repeatedly emphasize that colleges are not required to provide a FAPE. Instead, they just must provide equal access through reasonable accommodations. So what happens here is attorneys who might be helping to support students when they encounter problems at college. We have lots of potential clients call us. Oftentimes their parents are on the phone. We need to make that flip from the IDEA lens to the 504 lens. I'm not going to go through the various specifics about the language of each law, because what's really important here is to take off your IDEA hat and put on your ADA 504 hat. We can go to the next slide. So yesterday, Renee gave an excellent presentation on the student's voice. I had not seen or heard her presentation, but this is everything foundational that your student will need, your client will need to get ready for college. Transition planning is so very important. In Ohio, we start having transition planning goals when the student is 14. I think Danielle Randolph, our firm advocate, who you'll hear from, I think, again today, she and I look at the IEPs for our students, and consistently we see very weak transition planning goals. They will ask students with varying levels of disabilities what their career path is. And if a student says, I'm going to play professional basketball, their transition goal will be to go online once during the semester and look up what it takes to become a professional basketball player. It's unrealistic. It doesn't build skills. So what we always advocate for our younger students as they begin getting involved is very specific goals focused on transition. They have to prepare for their future. For some students, that's things like money skills or map skills, figuring out independent living skills. So all of those things are going to become important. And then piggybacking off what Renee said yesterday is building in our youngest students the ability to articulate for themselves why their supports, accommodations, things they're working on help them. To me, that is something that when your kid is 14 and you're thinking about your child going off to college, it's the furthest thing from their mind and your mind. But really beginning to understand how the accommodations that are put in place can help them one day be ready to be a self-advocate. IEP transition planning should also, in situations where students really need it, start looking at getting students involved with community agencies and resources. If there is county funding, if there are job skills funding, for our students who don't have extended school year, this is a time to tap into some organizations that might help them in ways outside the schools. So transition planning cannot wait till senior year. It has to begin very early. It's never too soon for your high school student to start researching with you what colleges have to offer, what programs they have to offer. Just for an example, if a student can't explain why they get extended time on tests, it will be really hard for them when they're sitting down with the disability coordinator at their college to explain how it helps them. So those are things that I would really encourage, along with what Renee was saying, was to speak with your child, to speak with your client, to make sure they can articulate why each of those accommodations support their learning. Students need to know their diagnosis. They should understand both their strengths and their challenges. We had a team meeting last week and someone spoke about students with special capabilities. I kind of love that. Special needs seems very almost a way that we're putting that disability first, and we should be shifting it. I have unique challenges. I have special capabilities. These are my strengths, and these are the areas that I need a little more support in. Students need to know medications that they take, who their emergency contacts are. These are all life skills, not just educational skills. So those are things to start thinking about early on when your student is in that K-12 space, and to encourage them to become cognizant and aware of what's in their plan as they are planning for their future. With that, we'll go to the next slide, which I think is our question. At the college or graduate school level, who is responsible for seeking the disability support and accommodations? We have 3 choices here. And haven't seen the results come up. Great job, everybody. Students is the correct answer. Parents can definitely be there in the role of what we would like to call a coach, helping your student get ready for when they're going to be the one that's responsible. We can skip to the next slide. So the parents changing a role. This is the hardest transition, not for our students, but for our parents. Parents have spent years being that primary advocate, and college changes that overnight. FERPA considerations here. We often have folks call us in and say, I pay tuition. I was very involved in the application process. We did the tour on campus. Paying tuition does not create access. The FERPA rights switch to the student at college. And many parents are shocked to find out that professors or university staff will not speak with them. College advisors will not speak with them. So some practical advice would be to encourage your students to sign FERPA releases. Many schools have their own releases. They can be found online. That will enable parents to have some level of communication beyond just getting the bills for tuition. There are also emergency contact forms. Students should obviously fill those out, making parents a form of contact. But if your student is going further away and may require more intensive support in a different city, make sure you have some emergency contacts local who can help your child, who are aware of their unique needs. The disability office themselves might have communication releases. This is something your students should find out. And again, I'm going to encourage you, if you are bringing a student with special capabilities or unique needs to a college campus, before you ever decide to get in there, you need to meet with the folks in the disability office to understand what it is they can do to help support your child. It's much easier to communicate with them when the crisis isn't happening, to have a relationship, to have that ability to speak with them while you are setting your child up for success, or while your child ideally is setting themselves up for success. Those educational rights belong to the student. This is an important conversation to have with your students. Parents have so much access right now, K-12, with portals that the schools use to communicate. Assignments are posted, grades are posted. That changes in college. There are many parents who find out far too late that their students were struggling, didn't attend, are failing classes. And while we would hope as parents that schools would be jumping in and taking steps to truly advise our students, sometimes they just assume that you are on college campus and you are independent enough to handle this. Again, these are conversations that you need to have ahead of time, opening up those channels of support. If it's not you who your child can speak to when they're struggling, if there is a therapist or a trusted friend, please encourage your child to keep those channels open. We have found in our practice that having a good connection with someone at the disability support office, disability resource office, is really an indicator of success for a student. If they feel that they can go talk to somebody, that somebody is on their side and helping to advocate for them from the inside, the chances of being successful when there is a challenge are greater. We can jump to the next slide. So lots of opportunities for post-secondary support for students. Again, meeting with that disability support office is critical ahead of time. Doing online research. There is a university here who touts their support for students on the autism spectrum. We have a former client who found out that that was a title that they did not give themselves at the university. Others had talked about it enough online, and that university actually didn't have a robust method of supporting students on the autistic spectrum. So do your homework, reach out, but there are sources of support once you're there. Highly encourage peer support groups, community connections in different cities, finding a mentor for your student. And then again, understanding all of the needs that the school will have regarding documentation and information gathering. I'm going to add just in a pivotal case here, 1979 Supreme Court, Southeastern College, Community College versus Davis. This is the Supreme Court case that held that 504, Section 504, does not require the institution to fundamentally alter a program or waive essential requirements. This is something you need to understand when your student is considering a college program, when your student is considering a course of study. What do those requirements look like? And how can your student be accommodated without changing the essential requirements of a given program? Many families assume that just bringing in a previous IEP will automatically allow any of those previous accommodations and services to continue, and that's not necessarily the case. Colleges may look to an IEP to understand what support your student had previously, but will likely be more beneficial to provide them with any current evaluations or physician letters, neuropsychological testing, so that we can then shift that focus from what the diagnosis was in the past, what happened in the K-12 space, to what will be the functional impact at a college. So when you're helping these families to get that documentation, provide it to the university, you need to make sure that a physician isn't just explaining a diagnosis. They need to talk about the limitations of a given student and the academic impact that those limitations may have. So if there is a request for an accommodation, need to explain why that's medically necessary for that student. Again, tying everything back, as we always do, to the academic impact. We can move on to the next slide. This is just a quick update with thanks to Liz Abnauer, who gave us this information. Right now we have this kind of black hole moment for new students who've been accepted, where sometimes they will do all the things they need to do. They've done their research, they've reached out to disability support offices, and their student becomes accepted at the university. And the question is, at what point does the university have to really sit down and talk with your student about what it is they can do? What is available to your student? And it was the case before that they really put students off. They didn't do much. So whether accepted students are entitled to that information about accessibility and accommodations prior to enrolling in school, this seems to indicate that they are. And it's bounded in, again, whether or not that university, that college, is going to be able to provide that student obvious representations of what's available. So again, it's bound in, oh yes, we can support your student. Oh, there's no problem. For sure, we'll make sure your student has a single dorm room. Again, they can't misrepresent something they can't deliver. So you can always ask when your student is accepted to sit down, get real details about what it is this university can provide your student. Push back if they're like, we're closed now, but we'll deal with it when they arrive in August. August might be too late. We can go to the next slide. So reasonable accommodations. This is what it's all about in college. So in providing the academic adjustment, your post-secondary school is not required to lower or substantially modify requirements. For an example, although your school might be required to provide extended testing time, it's not required to change the substantive content on that test. Your school doesn't have to make adjustments about the nature or service, the program, the activities. Here we have a picture, pulled off the internet, labs. If everybody has to do a lab for a class, your student likely has to do a lab for a class. If there is a functional reason that they can't perform it, the school only has to figure out a reasonable way to give your student access. They won't say, okay, you're a biology major, you don't have to do any lab work. It's just not reasonable. The other thing that does not have to happen is post-secondary schools do not have to provide aides, personal attendants, things that we have seen in the K through 12 space. They don't have to provide technology, things like readers for your personal use or your study. Students might need to come with some of the tools, the tech tools that support them. Tutoring, typing, they don't need to provide that. They could, there might be opportunities for peer notes. There might be opportunities to have courses recorded for later transcription. But again, that would be a reasonable accommodation. But having somebody come into class to type your notes for you likely would not be. So this is where expectations matter the most, because the ADA guarantees access, but it doesn't guarantee success. And it also doesn't guarantee your preferred accommodations. Students, we're going to go back one more time. Sorry. Students don't get to choose their accommodations, okay? Reasonableness is an interactive process. So again, this is an opportunity where that student voice will come in, that the student needs to explain what it is they need, okay? Schools won't lower academic standards. They won't eliminate essential requirements. They won't fundamentally alter their programs. This distinction becomes really important in professional schools, and we're going to talk about some of those later when we get to some case studies. I'll give one case out of the Sixth Circuit, Haltenberger versus Ohio College of Podiatric Medicine. This was a student who was diagnosed with ADHD, and she was dismissed from her program and sued under Section 504. So the crux of her case revolved around whether the college met its obligation to accommodate her disability. And in this case, the college had provided multiple accommodations for her, including tutoring, preferred seating, permission to tape lectures, extra time on tests, and the opportunity to take exams in separate rooms. But despite this, the student still failed required courses and was dismissed. The court upheld that the college's actions were within reasonable accommodations, and they allowed her to be dismissed. Again, this courts generally give lots of deference to colleges' academic judgments, okay? Here, they made the accommodations that were reasonable. Academically, she didn't meet the requirements of the program. Kaltenberger was dismissed. Now we could go to the next one. So these are some of the accommodations that your student might seek. There are certainly more. But again, when we're looking to college, we have to look at everything, how they're going to get there and how they're going to get home and everything in between. I'm going to throw in another case, a 2016 Sixth Circuit case called Bino versus American Bar Association. The lawyers will enjoy this one on the call. In this case, the Sixth Circuit affirmed dismissal of a blind test taker's challenge to the LSAT logic games section. This case actually turned on the party that Bino chose to seek a decision from, which was the ABA. The case ended up siding with the ABA. They were not the party, despite all of ABA's connections to the LSAT testing. It was actually the Law School Admissions Council, the LSAC, that was responsible for the creation of the LSAT test. It shaped really standing and liability questions for standardized testing. Subsequent to this case's conclusion, which said you've got the wrong party, but gave Bino a chance to go ahead against the correct party, Bino did not do that. I don't know where Bino is today. I don't know if Bino ever became an attorney, but subsequent to that, the California Department of Fair Housing and the U.S. Department of Justice filed a class action suit against the Law School Admissions Council and entered into a consent agreement regarding how LSAC should accommodate individuals with visual impairments. So there was change there. It's been a number of years since I took the LSAT, but hopefully they've found a way for those with visual spatial impairments to be able to be successful when it comes to things that require a level of internal visualization that those with impairments might be unable to be successful with. So next slide, documenting disability impacts. Again, we spoke about communication. The disability office cannot solve a problem they don't know exists. So students generally wait till the last minute to get some sort of support, and by then we know those options are limited. So communicating early and often, meeting with disability services, using office hours, reaching out to professors and TAs often are very helpful for our students to talk about what they need to be successful. Again, we talked about all of these items that might be needed. There's an asterisk here at the end for the high school accommodations history. Again, the fact that you had a 504 or an IEP in high school is not determinative of whether or not you're going to get those supports in college. So we'll get to the next one, which begins our case studies. So I have two here for academic accommodations. First one, second-year med school student with a mild visual impairment and ADHD. So in this case, this student required some sort of visual assistance, which involved bringing up the size of the text on examinations. For this student, which actually an interesting case, she would get paper copies of testing and test in a separate room. The case came to us because it was a very interesting situation where her test on paper was administered at the same time as the online test for her classmates. Our student sat down, started taking her test along with those others in the classroom, and within 10 minutes, someone realized that the version of the test was wrong. The school quickly pivoted, gave all of the students who were working online the correct version, but because of some other accommodations our student had about disruption during testing being very, it impacted our student very much, they didn't interrupt her. They let her continue to take the wrong version of the test on paper. And thereafter, they told her that the test was wrong, at least as to, I think it was about 10 questions. And they gave her a new version of just those 10 questions. This student raised some claims. She ended up filing a case with OCR. She wanted to assert that taking the test, which she obviously ultimately failed, both the incorrect version and then those 10 questions, that She was so greatly impacted by having the suggestions of the 10 wrong questions that her failure was due to the impact of everything that had on everything but the 10 questions. So, in correcting the 10 questions later, it did not help her overcome what she was doing when the test was first administered. Very interesting case. It was her second class failure. As many of you know, you are not granted so much deference with failures in medical school, nursing school, and the student was ultimately dismissed. Her case is ongoing with OCR, but as you also heard, that could be years. Second case here for academic accommodations, a sophomore nursing student who had an orthopedic impairment. We have this picture here because this is an interesting dilemma that this student had. She has fine motor fatigue. She cannot sustained write notes. But in this sophomore year of nursing, a lot of the information in the rotations with doctors, with patients, involved taking notes. This university said it had to be handwritten. They wouldn't let her bring in a tablet. They said getting notes from a peer was not sufficient. This is a case where I think, had we planned ahead, had this student anticipated this, that we could have gotten some accommodation for this student. Again, a real challenge for her, but one where I think reasonable accommodations could be found in this case. Recording had some concerns for privacy. Again, I think more could have been done by this nursing school here to accommodate this student with the fine motor fatigue. Again, if her fine motor fatigue compromised her ability to, say, take blood or insert an IV, that might be enough for them to say, we can't remove that requirement for graduation. We can't accommodate her. And I would guess that that would be deemed reasonable under their program if it was expected that nursing students be able to draw blood, give IVs. But in this case, it was all about that note taking. I think as technology advances, this might not become as big of an issue. Right now, I think that there were workarounds for this student that the nursing school, private nursing school, was not really willing to accommodate. Our next one, academic housing, medical accommodations. So lots of students come to us with different levels of needs. Again, the importance of visiting your campus, understanding how you as a student with considerable needs might be best accommodated and if you can be successful. This is a student who had very complex needs, medical, social, emotional issues. This student used a wheelchair, was fed through a GI tube, had a service animal to help identify seizures. The animal also helped with mobility around campus. This student, in my opinion, was probably not ready for life on a large college campus, but she wanted that life, and her parents were trying everything to make her successful. The university was bending over backwards to accommodate all of this. She got a single room. The university allowed a nursing aide to come in to help her in the mornings and in the evenings. Had some accommodations when she got into some trouble due to her service dog making a mess in the dorm and her inability to clean it up. Again, something we wouldn't anticipate, but if she's in a wheelchair, unable to get out of that wheelchair, and that dog has an accident, who's going to take care of it? The university was really very, very understanding with this student. But I'm not sure that at that point, when she entered, that this was the best decision for her and her family. Again, those expectations. Perhaps there was another way to accommodate her. At one point, the university thought that she would be better served on off-campus housing. She was living in a dorm for students who were of unique needs, many other autistic students. She was the only wheelchair user. They thought perhaps living in one of the university's apartment complexes would enable her to maybe bring in a support person more often. Because of her needs for mobility, that became an impossibility for her. She wouldn't be able to access transportation to and from for her classes and other on-campus needs. So again, for students with critical needs, very unique and challenging challenges, definitely coming to campus, talking to people, and anticipating what the needs are will be incredibly important. Other examples for other housing and medical, again, we talked about service animals, single rooms, air conditioning. Air conditioning is something we don't think about. Many students have problems with temperature variations, dietary accommodations, modifying meal plans, and priority housing, really having that student understand distances. It's not just about convenience. Sometimes it's essential for equal access. We'll go to the next one, testing accommodations. Again, we're going to talk about keeping lines of communication open. If something isn't working for a student, they really need to speak up quickly. They need to meet with the disability office, check in, modify the plan. This was a student whose headphones did not work with reliability in the testing center. When did the student wait? They waited until the final exam. They had twice previously had issues and just powered through. Waiting till the final was not a good idea. We'll go to the next one. I see we're getting close on time. Housing and dining accommodations. Again, freshman student coming to a state university. Many state universities require students to live in a specific dorm and partake of a certain meal plan. For this student with Crohn's disease, did not think about the impact of the dorm situation, which involved two living spaces with a Jack and Jill bathroom between the two for 6 girls. If you were in your room and wanted to use the bathroom, you locked the door on the other side and then locked the door on your side. This student found herself locked out of a bathroom even when somebody was not in there. Again, the severity of her Crohn's and colitis, lots of embarrassing things happened for this girl. She was not eating healthy because for the first time in her life, she was eating these institutional meals. Unfortunately for her, we had to go to the highest level of appeal. It was 3 appeals for her, but we were able to successfully argue that for her sophomore year, she could move off campus. The other nuance here is the university already had kind of a loophole allowing students involved in Greek life to not live in the dorms because of a social reason. We use that to point out that there was no real reasonable purpose for requiring students to live in the dorm if they were allowing students engaged in Greek life the out from the dorm and the meal policy. We'll jump to the next one, getting close to the end. Program expectations. This is one, I think, when folks have been asking what is coming up, what's challenges that we think might be on the horizon. This is an undergraduate student seeking an education degree who has autism spectrum disorder. This student was repeatedly put on performance plans for things that, to me, as somebody who has worked with students with autism for a very long time, all of these things were directly manifestations of his autism. He was written up for not making eye contact, for fidgeting, for having difficulty accepting feedback in peer and professor feedback sessions. They wanted quick responses from him when he was getting feedback. Had trouble with the give and take of the interaction in the classroom. We were able to successfully point out to this university that the very things they were writing him up for were manifestations of disability. So when you ask me about what is on the horizon and what do I see as a new challenge, I'm going to say that I think this is one of the most critical areas that we haven't thought of. K-12, we're doing great things supporting our students with autism spectrum disorder. This student ended up changing their major because the school did not believe that they could realistically put him in a student teaching position. Shocking to me, because we all know that K-12 schools are filled with students who learn differently, who have autism, ADHD. The fact that this student can't make eye contact or struggles with that quick back and forth would not be unique. But this school really said they could not place him in a student teaching position. And he changed his major. So for that, be on the lookout, start thinking of ways that you could help support your students. Definitely call out kind of this institutional bias that I think is going to happen with more frequency as the number of our students with autism spectrum enter college and pursue degrees. He wouldn't have been the first autistic student, the first autistic person to end up being a teacher, obviously, but I do think it's going to be a challenge for many of the universities coming up. We need to make sure that our students can demonstrate competency without altering the program requirements, but we also need to take into account that people are just different. And some of the things that were shown to be areas of bias, in my opinion, for his performance plan truly were not things that would be impactful in his student teaching situation. Next one, disciplinary considerations. Again, we talked about discipline yesterday. Academic decisions still get that tremendous judicial deference. So just because you are disabled, it does not create immunity from the conduct standards of a university. It may be that your student can access some additional support during hearings. They might be able to have an advisor with them. Again, Jessica spoke yesterday that advisors often aren't permitted to speak up in hearings. There's an expectation that the students will be able to advocate for themselves. There might be some additional support that students who are facing behavioral consequences at school can access through their disability office. Again, you never want to wait until it becomes a problem. So having that line of communication with the disability office is so critical. We'll go to this last slide. The 4 takeaways. Again, the law changes dramatically after high school. Turn off that IDEA and switch on 504 and ADA. The most important accommodation might be self-advocacy. So teaching our students to understand what the challenges are, what their strengths are, and to ask for assistance is going to be critical. Again, parents, you don't disappear, but you do have to transition from being the team manager to the coach. You're on the sidelines. You don't have those rights that you might think you have. You're still there. You're still important. But again, building that student to become their own best advocate is really the best that you can prepare them for college. Again, making sure your expectations and their expectations are realistic given the specific location of where they're going to school. And again, finally, success in college isn't determined solely by intelligence. It's often determined by your preparation and your communication and those realistic expectations. So it's not just an educational transition. It's a legal transition, it's a developmental transition, and it's often emotional for everyone. Our job isn't simply to know the law, but it's to prepare students to live and thrive within it. So with that, I thank you. I don't know if we have any questions.
We don't have any questions right now, but we can leave it open for a minute to see if we have any come in. Thank you, Ruth, for that wonderful presentation. Really appreciate learning about such an important part of a student, not just special education students, but a student's life in general, going to that post-secondary education. Do you ever see, I'll ask a question for you, Ruth, if that's okay. Are there any accommodations that you see colleges or universities commonly pushing back on? Like, is there a accommodation that a lot of students try to request and you happen to see the schools time and time again just refusing to accept that accommodation?
I think one of the biggest things, I think there was a Wall Street Journal article about it, that the number of students who now graduate high school with a 504 or an IEP is growing every year. And sometimes that's being questioned as part of the prep for being competitive at college. So I'm going to say additional time for test taking is one of those things that a lot of people ask for. In some situations, our students absolutely need that extra time. But I do sense a bit of a pushback. If everybody gets extra time, then what is extra time? So again, that critical need for that documentation, a doctor's letter saying, hey, they have a processing disorder. It takes them a little bit more time. They have dyslexia, whatever that is, to help kind of support that request. I often tell students distraction-free environments are really, really important, but you need to go and see what's offered to know if that's truly going to meet your needs. Universities will offer, small room testing. If there are 30 people in this room all working on their own carols, study carols, that's going to not be so distraction-free. So test out what the accommodations are, know what's available, and really seek the ones that will be most beneficial.
Thank you, Ruth. I really appreciate that. And we actually do have an interesting question I think you'll like in the Q&A. Are there certain majors or fields that seem to be more resistant to accommodations?
So I just keep coming back to this question of, is the general education, we all need teachers. We're desperate for teachers. Is education, the programs of teaching college students to become educators, is it ready to deal with a diverse population of students? My experience for that one student tells me no. But when I proposed that to the GC of that university, I said, are you telling me that my autistic student who plays with his shirt when you give him feedback or can't look at you cannot be a teacher? Because that's what it feels like you're telling us. I had some proposals for them. They offer a special certificate through their education degree program in special education, specifically autism spectrum disorder. I think universities need to kind of open up those avenues so that that kind of information and knowledge set is available to all of the degree programs. So I'm going to say education to me might be the one where it's most difficult. Obviously, any of the sciences that would require lab work, hands-on work, those are going to be difficult for any real specific orthopedic impairments, visual, hearing impairments. Again, it's really important to know what the expectations are for the program and what the course of study looks like so that you can anticipate those pitfalls.
Thank you, Ruth. That was really insightful. I appreciate it. And that takes us perfectly right to our time, right for our lunch break. So thank you again, Ruth, for the wonderful presentation. Everyone, I hope you enjoy your lunch. We will be returning at 1:00 p.m. and we will see you then.